Welcome back, everyone. This next conversation deals with the subject of child abuse and may be distressing for some viewers. For 22 years of her life, our next guest was a member of a religious group called the Children of God. She knew it as a movement founded by her grandfather, but the rest of the world knew it as a cult.
Stories of exploitation and child abuse made headlines, but the cult spread to 170 countries. In her new book, Cult Nun, author and lawyer Faith Jones talks about her time in this radical cult and how she eventually broke free. Faith, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Faith, I think society has had a long-standing fascination with cults, but it's always from the outside looking in. So was there any misconception about cults and the people in them that you wanted to set straight with this book?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons I give an intimate picture of what life is like inside of one of these cults. People don't join cults, they join families. And studies have shown that the type of people that typically do this are idealistic, good-natured, and altruistic. So that's one of the misconceptions. I think people can look at a cult and say, oh, that's so terrible, why would anybody join it? And that's why I wanted to write this book, is to show that there are certain red flags that people are often unaware of that can lead to abuse, even in an organization that has a loving, idealistic kind of front or ethos.
Since you were born into this religious cult, you were used to an unusual lifestyle that came with it. You grew up on an isolated farm, you prayed for hours every day, and you were forbidden from getting a mainstream education. What was the first moment or experience where you realized that things weren't quite right?
Well, I always realized that we were different because we did have contact with the outside world with our proselytizing, but we were taught that our way was right and their way was wrong. So I didn't really understand, I think, that some of the doctrines were wrong until after I left and had a chance to really experience the outside world. I could tell when people's actions within the cult didn't sync with what they were saying was happening.
Now, the cult was most criticized for the way that it sexually exploited women and children. Women were forced into having sex with men in a practice that was called sharing, and adults were encouraged to have sexual relations with children in the name of God. So how was that explained or rationalized to you when you were younger?
We were taught that that sex was godly and healthy and beautiful and loving, and that there shouldn't necessarily be any barriers or restrictions around it. Now, the issue of adult-child sexual contact, this existed for maybe around 10 years within the cult, and I think that there were some people in the cult who didn't participate at all. There were some people who maybe participated a few times in something like that to try to be, in obedience to what they felt like my grandfather was teaching. And then there were others who had that perversion. And for those, I think they abused a lot of people, a lot of children. And even after the cult made a ban on it, oftentimes continued that abuse. And the issue was that because the cult had legitimized this, it gave them a validation or the ability to have free reign of these perversions.
So as Jam mentioned earlier, you were born into the cult and you didn't leave physically the cult until you were 22 and you pursued a higher education. And then it was only after that you were able to really come to terms with what had happened to you. And I understand it was a boyfriend of yours who really helped you realize that you actually had been abused. What was that moment of dawning like for you?
There were ways that I had realized that certain things that had happened, especially like child sexual relations, were wrong even before that. But I didn't realize that the sexual coercion that I had experienced was in fact rape until he pointed that out to me, that when we feel coerced into having sex with somebody for fear of punishment, that actually qualifies as rape. And that was a big eye-opening moment and a shock for me. And that was difficult. That was difficult. I had to reassess everything that I had experienced.
Since leaving the cult, you've tried to answer one central question: where did things go wrong? And you say that the answer is self-ownership. Can you explain that more to us?
So one of the key things that happens in these kind of cults and groups, and really we see it in society in many organizations, even political factions, where it is taking away your sense of self-ownership, saying that we were taught our body does not belong to us. It belongs to God, by which they meant it belongs to the group, and we have to do what the group/leaders tell us to do. And what I've seen is that, and I discuss this in more detail in my TEDx talk and in the last chapter of the book, is these principles of integrity. And when people turn over their sense of self-ownership, they also tend to turn over their sense of moral responsibility for their actions with the excuse of, I was just doing what I was told. So this combines to create an environment with a high potential for abuse.
You know, most people won't know what it's like to leave a cult in their lifetime, but there are a lot of people who do struggle with leaving a toxic or abusive dynamic relationship. So what do you hope those people gain from your story?
There's a few things. One is that you can heal. There are wonderful therapies and techniques out there that you can reclaim your life. And the few things that I focus on helping people teaching people is not just an objective standard by which we can measure integrity and create healthy boundaries, but also to gain economic independence. Because without that, it is very, very difficult for people to leave abusive and coercive situations.
Faith, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We really appreciate it. The book is called Sex, Cult Nun, and you can find it everywhere now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.